A Christian perspective would say, find what's true and then have faith that that's intertwined with something beautiful. That's the goal. In a business context, you find out what's the true thing here, and then you dig for what's the romance of the true thing, and you find it.
Welcome to the Creative Community Podcast presented by Destination Arete. I'm David.
And I'm Mark. And as brothers, we grew up telling stories together for over 15 years. And as adults, we want to continue telling stories together. And we also want to invite you into our brothers' brain trust.
We started this podcast to share the beginning of our story, the stories that influenced our story as we were growing up, and then continue writing that story together. And we're doing that by building a community of people who work together to find creative solutions to telling inspirational stories.
Yeah, and today we are talking with a storyteller, Zach Franzen.
We have to be honest. We initially invited Zach on to talk about illustration. I had lunch with a friend. He said, Zach is an illustrator. You should have him on your podcast. I said, great. But we quickly pivoted. I think at one point, Mark, I told you, forget all the questions that we had prepared. Get rid of those. We're talking to Zach about this. And it was really what we wanted to talk to him about was the role of storytelling and marketing. But what ended up happening was he started telling us why having a liberal arts degree is so valuable in today's workplace. So if you have a liberal arts degree from a university or college, or you're working on one, or you're considering getting one, this is the podcast for you. You need to listen to this one.
Yeah. So without further ado, here's our conversation with illustrator, storyteller, marketing guru, actor, prop designer. The guy does it all, Zach Franzen.
So my name is Zach. I live in North Carolina right now in a little town called Creedmoor. So we live on Main Street of Creedmoor, but it is a small town. And so we both live very close to the main street of Creedmoor and have deer in our backyard. That's how small a town Creedmoor is. So we moved here. I think we've been in this house maybe a year or two. I've been an illustrator full time, and I've done illustration freelance for a while, as well as worked in marketing. I guess maybe the key to my background is that everything is some combination of writing and speaking and art. I've done those things independently. I worked as an actor for a couple of years out of college. I studied theater. I also worked in illustration, doing that sort of freelance. I also worked as a writer exclusively, but I've done sort of combinations. So I've done like presentations, and I've done illustrations, sort of part of the presentation. I taught at Furman University for 2 years, digital illustration. So that's like speaking and presenting, and also illustrating, obviously. So that's kind of, I guess, maybe the key to my background, which is a little bit convoluted. So if that makes anything clear.
So you've been telling stories.
Yeah, just a brief overview. So I did some, out of college, I did theater stuff. So I worked for a company called Sight and Sound Theaters. I did that for a couple of years. I was in the cast there. And then I worked for a company called it's called Student Life. I think my friend and I auditioned at the Southeastern Theater Conference, and I got like a couple offers for gigs. And like one was like a Christmas show, I think in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, which I was not going to do that in December, Wisconsin. And so, and then one was to be a part of a quartet in Dollywood. I guess they have a quartet where people dress up kind of like Rockwellian Dickens characters, and they sing at Christmas balls. So they offered me a job doing that. The problem with those jobs is that it's really difficult. It's a 6-week job maybe, and you got to move there. And then you got to find some kind of arrangement to live, and finding some place that's going to put you up for 6 weeks and looking for another job in 6 weeks. It's just, it's pretty fraught. So my friend and I both got offered a job at this company in Birmingham called Student Life. And so we thought, oh, we'll do that. So they had a play and a show that went around and toured some 12 cities. And I did that for 2 years. And I realized that I was getting older. It was a fun job. I didn't want to travel that much. It was like 3 days on, 4 days off, or 4 days on, 3 days off, constantly. And so I wanted to put some roots down somewhere, and all my friends were getting work experience, and I was just getting older. And so I was kind of casting about, trying to figure out what to do. I painted some murals in some schools and like at a bookstore and things like that, but that is not a lucrative job, and it's not a super steady paycheck either. And so I had some friends at a company called Portland Studios that they had started outside after college. and they asked me to come and do writing for them, do some story stuff. So I did that. And that was just a short gig. It was pretty good, and I enjoyed it. And then I went back to Columbia, South Carolina, and I was working in the theater department at USC, making props for shows, and then working at UPS at midnight, loading trailers. And they got back in touch, and they wanted me to come on and work doing sort of story development stuff for them. So I did that because I knew like story structure and stuff. So they called me into that. So I did that, but I also did production art while I was there, and some animation stuff and some other things. And then that sort of snowballed into freelance. And that was, I got to work for a lot of different clients, and I got to do stuff for a bunch of different types of work, and editorial art and book illustration. And I did stuff for licensing for like, there were some DreamWorks Pictures licensing books, and then some like Marvel Superhero Squad cards, like trading cards. It was a game, I guess. So it was that kind of thing. But again, like it was paycheck to paycheck. It was sort of, I was hungry for those jobs that would come in, and they were, it was fraught. And that time I got married, and then it was really, I was really anxious about what to do. And so I was still getting some of that stuff. I think there was like, I had an agent, he was getting me, I was doing samples for book covers and some, tryouts for like documentaries and stuff. They needed illustration. I was doing that. And sometimes you get paid for that, and sometimes you wouldn't. And it was just sort of a gamble. I remember, I think we had maybe like $10 in our checking account. And I used probably like 5 of it to go to Kinko's and print up some like postcards. Today, it's probably a little bit different. It's been a while. Like most of the work I just get from requests now, and I'm more selective about what I do. But I was taking anything and everything then, and sort of casting as wide a net as I could. But I only had like, I don't know, I probably had 10 postcards, maybe less. And so you send a postcard out to the magazine or out to the art director, and you cross your fingers and hope that they like it enough to maybe put it on their corkboard over their computer. And then hopefully in 6 weeks, something matches and they give you a call. It's that kind of thing. So I was just sort of doing that. And one of the places I submitted to was it was a news magazine. So I'm conservative. At the time, there were only 2 conservative magazines that did illustration. And there are like 40 really progressive, magazines that did illustration. But at the time, it was the Weekly Standard and the National Review. And they were the only ones who did any illustration. And the National Review, I don't know if he still works there. I think it was Roman Jen, maybe is his name. He was this guy who did kind of all their illustration. He might've been on staff. For Weekly Standard, they had all these like superstars. They had like Thomas Fluharty, and they had like Gary Locke, and they had Jason Seiler, and they had there's a guy, Dave Milan, he does beautiful work. And so I thought, well, I mean, might as well just like in my stack of postcards, I thought might as well just send something out to them. I remember specifically being like anxious because I misspelled some like the address on a couple of the cards. And so of my slim chances, these were even, I was making them slimmer by like messing up the cards. And my hand was like sweaty, like I was diffusing a bomb, right? Like it was like, I had a lot of anxiety. And so I finished the cards and I mailed them, and I worked on sort of like trying to get other work through other means. But 2 or 3 days later, I get an email from Philip Chalk at the Weekly Standard, and the subject line was "Postcard Pays Off." And he asked me to do it was like a half or third page illustration, an assignment. We had like a 24 or 48 hour turnaround time, because it's like the magazine came out every 2 weeks. So they had to turn that stuff around really quickly. He was very kind to me, and he was very like generous with his time and sort of, walking me through some of what they needed. And then he just started filtering me work, which sort of upped my profile a little bit, and that kind of helped with things. And then, I did some other work in addition to that. So once my daughter was born, I thought I should probably get some insurance. I worked for BJU Press, and which is a Christian publisher, and I did work for them. So that was a good experience for me. It's just a lot of work. And then in the evenings, I would do freelance, and I did some stuff for Journey Forth. I did some stuff for my friend Sam, the Green Ember books. I see the one behind you, and then like I said, I taught at Furman University for a couple of years doing digital illustration. So after all that, I had some friends call me up and say, hey, they were friends I knew in college, and they said, you want to come work with us in this software company doing marketing? and we're doing real narrative heavy story stuff. And we thought you might. And I said, I don't want to do that. That's not really my trajectory. And they said, actually said, how many jobs are you working right now?
Oh,
And I said, I'm working 3 jobs right now. I'm working I'm sort of 40 hours doing this. And then in the evenings I'm doing this. And then I'm also teaching twice a week. And my friend said, how would you like to work 1 job for a lot more money and with more time? And my wife said, you would love to do that. That would be a great solution. So it actually did turn out to be a good solution. The company I went to work for, I got to speak a lot and work on presentations and presentation coaching and sort of helping with that. So I got to speak in Madrid and Amsterdam and Australia and New Zealand and in the States and work on a lot of I was on a special teams in a special teams position working on that, I don't know, sort of special marketing projects and stuff. I left that job and went to another job, and now I'm in another company, and that's, I guess, how that goes in that field. But so yeah, so I still do freelance. I still do a number of projects. I'm still working with Sam on some stuff, and also doing some more businessy art. So I think that's probably the long explanation. I think I might have said a brief overview.
I don't know how you make that brief. I have to be honest.
Yeah. So that's kind of my journey, so to speak. But
this is just quick. What is businessy art? What is that?
Yeah. So businessy art looks a little bit more like editorial art. The interesting thing with business is that there's a humanities gap in business. Most people get there through MBAs or technical specialties. Like with a lot of the marketing right now, you have people that emphasize historically, you have people who emphasize either universals or particulars. And universals speak across people groups in a common language. But I think right now our segment is really particularized. And the whole idea is, how do you speak to people in this demographic that fall into this thing with these keywords and that stuff? However, I would say that stuff's changing because of iOS changes and the cost of customer acquisition and all that stuff. And so what's required now is the ability to speak across people groups, to speak more in universal terms. But the other problem with sort of not having anybody, like people don't know who Hamlet is, like that kind of, and they're geniuses, like incredibly smart, but they just don't have any background in our common heritage, in our literary legacies, any of that stuff. They don't sort of know the common cultural touchstones, and also don't really have a good sense of story at all. And their view of design and illustration, it all looks the same. It's almost all the same. So I'm glad you asked me to clarify, because I don't do that. I don't do vector people with no faces, now with really small heads, sort of like doing the kind of like most of business art looks like the male, female on the bathrooms that if they sort of came to life and turned around and walked and stuff, that they call them explainer videos. I guess you've probably seen that stuff. So that's what most of it is. Probably 90% of it is. I think there is a gap that courageous companies can exploit. And there aren't that many courageous companies that want to do that. But if you look at like the 60s, if you look like there's a really good illustrator, Austin Briggs, who was working in the, in the 60s, and in particular the 60s, and maybe a little bit in the 50s. But there's a great campaign he did for TV Guide. He did these ads for TV Guide, and they're just pencil drawings, and they're kind of contoury. The poses that the people have are super natural and even kind of weird. Like his framings they work, but they're real strange. And I keep thinking, like, if somebody were to do that kind of thing in modern clothes, like, it would be groundbreaking. But the problem is, again, this is me. I'm dangerously close to griping, but complaining. But the problem is, when people talk on LinkedIn, when they talk real big about how they love story, and when they talk real big about how they love sort of like really innovative, creative stuff, like that's aspirational. But whenever they have to make a decision, they always revert to middle of the pack solutions, because they're terrified of making the wrong decision. And they don't understand the mechanisms required for creative solutions, like that there are pieces that you put together in order to come to a result. So they speak about it as almost though it's magic. Like somehow this creative stuff just kind of works magically. And it's like you just you're in a blind room and you threw a dart and it hit a bullseye, and who knows how, right? And creative solutions are a little bit more systematic and a little bit more blue collar, frankly, and less kind of like the muse speaking to me. And so you kind of just have to find the right match, I guess, to be able to sort of do that stuff. So I've been able to do some of that internally and behind the scenes and some externally, but we'll see what the future holds on that. So businessy art has to do, to answer your question for real, illustration tends to be emotional, right? But editorial art tends to be humorous or intellectualized. It's a little bit more rational. And so it's, so for business, it tends to basically co-opt the decision-making processes for editorial art in order to get people to read what you want them to read. Whereas for literature, that's more about making the book an artifact that's valuable and worth keeping. And it does help people hold their hand a little bit through the process. It does frame the book in a particular way that's helpful, but chiefly it's not as like setup, payoff, like setup, illustration, payoff, text. It tends to be more cooperative, I think. And the lines are a little bit more blurred. The handoff's a little bit more subtle than in editorial art, which is really sort of like, a setup and a payoff. Sorry, that's so verbose.
No, we are not asking you any of the questions that we sent ahead of time. We are only talking about this for the next 10 minutes.
Okay.
Because this is the best thing that we've ever talked about on this podcast. I don't want to speak for Mark, but I'll let him speak for himself and confirm or deny what I just said.
This is so cool. I'm literally having the best time right now. So thank you so much for explaining what business art is. That was fantastic.
Yeah, well, that's probably a controversial definition. I'm sure other people would have other definitions, but that's my view.
I watched a YouTube video recently about the Burger King ad where they're dancing, and he said, this is why business art is bad. Because it's like these round people, and it's like kind of like Pixar if they only spent $10 and all they're doing is just kind of like doing this, and they're like holding cheeseburgers, and it's just the whole ad is just
is it tongue in cheek? I haven't seen the ad.
Well, no, it's DoorDash. I'm sorry, it's not Burger King. It's a DoorDash commercial, and it's not tongue in cheek. It is simply they're so happy they ordered food. They have the food. They're doing a dance, and he's just talking about the style of the art. Just doesn't even make you want to view the actual piece.
Yeah.
He's like, this doesn't make me want to keep watching it. I want to turn it off.
So I wouldn't blame the agency that did that.
No, I don't think
they
he
had
was
three
either.
ideas, and that was the one they thought nobody would pick. Right. And
yep, it's true.
And they put it in there as a way to direct people toward the good idea. And lo and behold, they picked the bad idea because it was the safest one. And also probably with a company like DoorDash, I mean, DoorDash, not to.
No, we can cut that out, but
DoorDash is going to come after.
I don't, there goes my sponsorship.
Yeah, we're not sponsored anymore.
Yeah.
We have to cut the ad read.
But I not to throw them under the bus, but they probably have a lot of stakeholders. And then they probably have there's another problem with, and this goes into, and I wouldn't classify myself as a designer by any means, but when it comes to branding for these organizations, what you have like, they really double down on the stuff that's not super critical. And as a means to make up for a lack of, so they'll double down on colors and typography and arts aesthetic style, but they don't double down on what the company's reputation is, what they promise you, like what they stand for, like all that stuff, they don't define very clearly. And so because they don't define it clearly, they have to double down on logo colors and like all that other stuff. And so as a result, you tend to have these empty shells of either ads or content marketing, and there's not a spine in it that really sort of, they're not inhabiting the brand, and so it's this kind of armor that they put on, and then sort of police really, really tightly. And I blame designers for that. I think that's sort of, it's just an easy thing to do, and because mechanization is so prevalent in especially in tech, Everybody's sort of specialized, and there aren't generalists in these organizations. And so nobody can put text and images together in a way that makes sense. So you just have somebody that's just slapping these things together in ways that don't quite fit. But this is just these are siloed, things, and somebody stitches them together at the end of the day, and that's why they're not persuasive as objects of communication. And that's why, like, if you think about communication as two people or many people communing over meaning, and therefore requiring some touch tones or some common languages, that makes sense. You're not going to get there if it's just like, here's our colors over and over again, and it's easier to fit into your process. Those kind of solutions are easier to fit into your process, so they tend to be in the foreground.
How do you see cultural touchstones, or literary touchstones, or things like that? How do you see that being able to be incorporated better into that medium?
Okay, so there's what's possible given the circumstances, and then my own aspirational nonsense, right? So I think that there are a couple opportunities to deliver content. Digital is one big one, like digital marketing, so your social media and ads and stuff like that. But then you have a lot of conferences in these organizations where a lot of customers come in and people have to sort of communicate to them in person, and you build a presentation and you make an argument and all that kind of thing. And there's a lot more room for that. When I worked at Genesis, I spoke at a sales conference about the FBI's 5-step staircase of behavioral change and how that coincides with book 9 of the Iliad. And they ate it up. Like, they love that, right? And it's not, but if you're the temptation is to say, nobody will understand, nobody will get it, and you go, oh, like, everybody jumps on the latest bestseller faddish sales book or marketing book, but they don't understand that the Iliad's been in print for like a really long time, right? And if you're looking for what speaks across people groups and time, you're probably going to do a little better with the Iliad than you will with like Challenger Sale or whatever. And so I think it's just, you have to sort of win over internal stakeholders. And then sometimes you have to do translations. So you're not going to say Aristotle, because that'll freak people out and they'll think they'll get distracted by it, and then it'll be a problem. So you might, and you might not talk about the canons of rhetoric or something, but you might just say that here are 4 or 5, depending on who you're drawing from, like ways to create something that's your invention, arrangement, style, memory, and delivery. Like, these are your sort of steps. Well, Cicero says that, but if you tell them Cicero said that, they'll all freak out, because they're like, well, that seems old and we're doing new tech and all, I don't know, and all that stuff. So you might just have to be a translator. So I think there are places for it, but I also think that there's more tolerance for it on the part of the audience than there is for the people who are putting it out, than the companies who are doing that kind of content marketing. So for example, I think that if somebody were to look at all just look through the history of illustration and look through really clever aesthetic solutions, there's just a lot that you can borrow from that would work today. But people are afraid to do that. And there's also just a lot of race and gender kind of dictates that keep the illustration from being too representational, and that keep it sort of more, purple people and people who are sort of polka dots and stuff, so that you don't have to question, like, do we have enough representation of this, that, or the other thing? So I mean, it's fraught. I'm not saying it's an easy thing, but I think there are opportunities there to really stand out, if anybody wants to stand out.
The topic came up. I work at a Christian college and I teach art. And so a topic came up of the idea of visual literacy. So the guy that's teaching our illustration and graphic design course is really big into visual literacy. He's like, our designers and our illustrators need to be visually literate in the history of style and things. So I found that idea kind of fascinating, in the idea that we are educated in terms of literature, we're educated in terms of speech and verbal communication, but oftentimes our education in schools, we're not visually literate. Does that make sense? A lot of people.
I've heard that argument, and but I wonder how much they're overestimating how literate we are with literature. I mean,
okay.
Let me give you two examples. Let's say that you've got to do an ad, you've got to do a campaign, right? And you go, and this is sort of probably everybody would do this kind of campaign, or this is always going to be in probably your top 20 options. And you go, oh, we want to do a Raymond Chandler private eye kind of thing, right? Well, writing in that way, how many people that are content marketers can write like Raymond Chandler or Dashiell Hammett, right? Not a lot. And how many people in content marketing, they maybe did communications. I'm being negative. I don't want to be negative, but I have noticed that really intelligent people who are incredible writers, they're good at expositional writing and they're good at clarity, and that's wonderful, but they're not good at finding out what's the emotional truth to a thing and then how do I support it and advance it. Instead, they're just sort of defaulting to, I got to churn out these things today. And sometimes a brand will say, well, we've got a voice that we write in that's consistent with our brand, but they're almost all the same. I mean, they pretend like they're really different, but they all sound the same. And so when you go, so now you go, okay, well, in a similar way, a private eye, sort of a no nonsense, I'm the guy that's going to find the solution for you. And maybe there's some kind of company that would benefit from a gritty kind of jaded cynic that sort of has the soul of like a knight. Maybe that's, maybe somehow their brand benefits from that kind of a campaign. And so then you think of what's the illustration style. And then you would say, well, if we do like 1960s book covers, right? Like paperback book covers, like that people will immediately sort of get where we're coming from. Like those kind of old, or like old movie posters from like, adventure movies or whatever, whatever that stuff is. Like it's gonna frame the offering in a good way so that people can consume it properly and they come to the right conclusions. And what you're doing is you're actually limiting distractions, because you're sort of you're narrowing how you're communicating in order to limit all the other distractions. Now, it's possible that people wouldn't know that second thing about like what are the paperback covers, but I think it's equally possible they wouldn't know the first thing about how to write like Dashiell Hammett or Raymond Chandler, or if it was like I don't know, some other style, like some other kind of like, Sir Walter Scott or something. So I think the nature of international business is making, like, what you'll have is if you have a company that just applies to North America, they take all sorts of chances. They'll do humor and they'll do things because they know that the idioms will be processed by people in North America well. The moment that they add an international client, the top one comment is it international? Can we scale it? And what ends up happening is that people underestimate the world's ability to understand English phrases and idioms. Like I actually had some people, I gave a talk in Madrid, and I had some people go, do they get bicycles? Are they going to understand bicycles? And so I was talking to some Spanish people. I said, there was some concern if you'd understand bicycles. And they're like, what? Like, no, we get bicycles. We ride bicycles all the time. So yeah, I mean, it's a quandary, but and I'm not saying that guy's not right about the lack of visual literacy, but I just to extend it, I wonder how literate people are in general.
Yeah, and my question with that is it would be interesting because people may not be as visually or literarily literate. Because I agree with you. I think it's probably more of an issue across the board in terms of speech and literature and art. But how original those ideas would seem if presented, like, because of how illiterate we are. Like if you brought, something from Yugen magazine into an American publication now, people would be like, this is, where did you get this? Like, this is amazing.
It would cost $1 million for one, to do that much illustration in a magazine, but it would definitely, it would feel like a prized, it'd probably be $16
Right.
like if to buy the magazine.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think you're dead on. I think that's exactly what's happening. I think that all people, their whole time frame is 15 minutes long. And so whatever design tropes that have happened in the past 15 minutes, they're going to recreate. And also, I just think there's something, I'm gonna get in trouble, but something about designers that they're good at clarity. They're kind of overly efficient. And I had an art director tell me once, he was talking about Old Man Magazine illustration where like Mort Drucker would draw a page and he said there was just a million things happening in it. And he said that he would just, as a kid, he would pore over it. And there was so much going on. But if you're a designer, that's an anathema to you, right? Like you want people to be on and off the page with as little effort as possible. And so I kind of wonder how much like savoring an image or lingering over an image, or how much designers sort of push that aside. And particularly their solutions for business. I mean, it's just, there's so much information, you're competing against so many things. And so they want really punchy, direct things, I guess.
Yeah, because that's one thing that I was noticing is there's the difference between fast art and slow art. You know, slow art is like gallery art where you have to specifically go into a place to look at it. You have to go off the street into the place. And then there's like blue collar art, which is fast art, where it's posters, you know, things that are competing. Because there's a million things competing with you for your attention. And I'm noticing that I do fine art, and even now Instagram has changed that, where if you don't have high value contrast in your image on Instagram, like whether it's a painting or not. I was with a fine artist and we looked through, he took me through all the images that didn't sell that year. Like he had sold a lot, but there were certain ones that didn't sell. And I was like, they're all ones that don't have a clear value structure. Like all your other ones that did sell did. And he was like, okay, interesting. So it was interesting to have that conversation with him to see like, okay, you're selling something now that's, you know, the size of 2 inches or less, you know, that means it has to have like that designerly read, I guess. So
when you say, so is it that the value structures are well organized and readable, or is it, because have you seen like I'm thinking of like an illustrator like Sam Weber maybe, or somebody who does these sort of like really there's another guy, he does stuff for the Folio Society. I think he might have done like a Great Gatsby kind of illustration, but it was these really graduated tones, and the effect felt spiritual a little bit, like it felt like religious art, kind of like Gustave Doré a little. I mean, like I understand those are etchings and stuff, but if you look at the way that those aren't, those are readable images. But there's also like this kind of graduate, like the tones they kind of blend into each other, and it feels so. And the second thing is it feels contemplative, and I could see how that wouldn't jive well with the Instagram. Because the whole nature is to sort of like scroll until something arrests you,
right?
And it's not like contemplation it's not suited for that environment.
So then my question would be, what do you see as the value of contemplation in a business environment?
Well, so illustration has to shake hands with whatever the content is that it's illustrating, right? And I think that a good relationship, I think it's like Charles Dana Gibson is an illustrator of the turn of the century, the Gibson girl, and you would do these sort of like, you know, hatching. It wasn't even cross hatching, it was just these long parallel strokes. James Montgomery Flagg is another guy illustrating that way. And those guys would do illustrations that had text. So I can think of one cartoon kind of in Life magazine where there was like I'm going to do a bad job explaining it, but there was like a guy and a girl on a couch looking disinterested in one another at a fancy party. They had like the one guy had like a tuxedo on and he was kind of like, you know, looking at his fingernails or something. And then there was like the girl who just sort of was staring, and she looked like her, you know, her eyelids were kind of half closed and she looked bored. There was a guy with a tray who would just who'd come in upon them. And if you look at it, it looks like that type of kind of just sort of elegant, glamorous, turn of the century kind of scene, until you read at the bottom a tale told by a sleeve, and the girl is wearing puff sleeves, and the sleeve that's closest to the guy is absolutely crushed up against her, and you get the idea that they, right before the guy had entered, they were they were right up against one another, right? That was sort of the gag. And now when he came in, they were apart. That illustration doesn't work on its own without the verbal tag, and the verbal tag doesn't work on its own without the illustration. So that kind of cooperation is beneficial. So I would say that whatever the answer is to your question, like in a business context, contemplation, the better question I think might be, is there anything that a business offers that would benefit from contemplation? And I think the answer would be, of course, yes. And so I think find those things, and then find a way to back into a treatment that serves that thing. These problems are obviously very complex when it comes to the parameters of where the art is seen and what you're promoting and all that stuff. But I think particularly a Christian perspective would say, find what's true, and then have faith that that's intertwined with something beautiful. And so then you dig and to find what the beautiful thing is, but that they're connected, right? It's that harmony, like do the good work of speaking the truth beautifully. That's sort of like that truth, goodness, and beauty triad, that threefold chord kind of thing. That's the goal. And when you do that, it's hospitable to people. And it also has a lot to do with gratitude, less to do with like protest, less to do with, I don't know, degradation or disgust or whatever. In a business context, you find out what's the true thing here, and then you dig for what's the romance of the true thing, and you find it. There's a great, I've said this before, and somebody asked me for the quotation. I went looking for it and couldn't find it. So I'm attributing to C.S. Lewis something he may or may not have said. But I recall reading a book about moonlight and sunlight, or it wasn't a book about it, but he had an article, I think, in the Seeing Eye, it was the book. And he was talking about moonlight and sunlight, and he had an interesting line about moonlight as merely indirect sunlight. But the more you think about it, the indirectness of art and the sunlight of propositions, those things work well together, and there's a whole spectrum once you do it. And so people don't go out to see the beach more clearly in the evening, but they do go out in the evening under the moonlight to see the beach the romance of the beach maybe more clearly. Like something about the indirectness of that light elevates maybe the soul of the beach or the interior nature of the beach. Like there's something there. And so it's not to denigrate sunlight, right? And it's not to denigrate the propositions and expositional writing or any of that stuff. But it is to say that there are opportunities to find out how to tell the truth beautifully, even in advertising or even in a campaign, provided that you're telling the truth. If that's kind of crucial.
Man, Zach, we didn't mean to make you work while you were not at work. So we really appreciate all this. This has been incredible. I have to ask you one more question. Sure. And I know we've taken up a lot of your time, so you can answer it as succinctly as you physically can.
It's impossible for me to answer anything succinctly. I think we've seen.
That wasn't at your expense, I promise. You can tell me whether or not you've had this moment, but what was the moment that you realized everything you had been doing, all these jobs, had all of a sudden prepared you for what you were about to be doing or what you found yourself doing? And did you have that moment of realization, or was there a time where you were like, oh, I think I now know how to put all this puzzle together and to hand it to a client and say, this is what you need to hear?
Yeah, I'm still having that moment, I think. But it is a weird thing. This is repeated probably so much it sounds trite, but if somebody is just out of college and they have a art degree and they're finding themselves doing, interested in other creative things, the temptation to specialize is so overwhelming in our society. And even if you're listening to, like, if you're interested in illustration in particular and you're listening to art directors talk, they'll say, don't work in multiple styles, do one style. So I know how to pigeonhole you for a job. And that's sort of like the kind of gold plated advice and stuff. And I'm not going to say they're wrong. And I'm sure there's a path that makes sense. But I think if you follow, if you're curious and you're following what's interesting to you, that stuff always finds a way to emerge. And so if you're studying story and you're studying art and you're studying comic books and theater, and you're going to start finding all kinds of cross applications. The cross-disciplinary approach has a lot of unity in it, because these things the way you solve problems in one thing apply to another thing. And you actually might be around a bunch of people who only have specialized training and they've never thought about how to solve it, or how to proceed thinking through the problem in another way. And I know I've been on the receiving end of that from people who have done that, who have had sort of two completely wildly different sound design and mixing and, writing, and they kind of go, or music and writing, and they go, oh wait, there's a way that the human brain processes climaxes and resolutions, and we like tension to pay off in particular ways, and so this totally applies to how you write and how you tell a story. So I would just encourage anybody who's finding themselves they feel like they're spread across a bunch of different disciplines to just to hang on, because they all have a way, there's a unity of truth, and it all has a way of sort of feeding back into itself.
Where can the people find you, Zach? Is Instagram the best place? Is LinkedIn the best place? What you got?
I don't know. I'm not. I actually worked for a social media management company for a couple of months, and got a little chagrined at social media, so I kind of dropped off the map for a while. But yeah, Instagram is probably the best place. In fact, I'll see if I can't put some stuff up so that there's some new stuff up if people should care to visit.
Once again, thank you so much to Zach for being on the podcast with us. That was absolutely fantastic. I so enjoyed our conversation, as you can tell, because I hogged all of the questions that did not let David get a word in edgewise. So there will be a podcast episode coming out very soon where I just sit very quietly and I let David do all of the talking because I feel bad, but it's all right. The point is, be sure to follow Zach on Instagram at Zach Franzen. And you can also connect with him on LinkedIn by searching his name. And if you connect with him, just tell him, hey, I found you through the Creative Community Podcast.
Yeah, once you've done that, be sure to subscribe to the Creative Community Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, YouTube, SoundCloud for more interviews like this one. And leave us a comment or review and let us know what your favorite part of this conversation was. It helps the algorithm out, and we really appreciate hearing your feedback. I love when I open YouTube and see another comment from someone. Just recently, we had comments on older episodes that I thought were kind of in the past. People were saying appreciated hearing. I think it was TJ Cunningham, Mark. They were saying appreciated hearing his historical perspective, and then also like the story of why he creates those paintings. So speaking of the algorithm, feel free to send this episode to a friend you know that would be encouraged by what Zach shared with us today. We'd really appreciate that as well.
Yeah, and you can connect with us through Facebook and Instagram, Destination Arete, ARETE, for information about future episodes like this one, as well as information about community activities and upcoming Arete projects. So if you want to be the first to hear about those upcoming interviews, though, the sneak peeks, all the future content, all the exciting announcements, then I would highly recommend subscribing to our newsletter, destinationarte.com/contact. And that is the newsletter is a great way to stay in touch with us, to be kind of on the front lines of getting all the information and things like that, and kind of being the closest to the action, all the Arte action. So you can also, if you want to subscribe to that, you can also just send an email to destinationarte@gmail.com, and we will get you subscribed for that instantly. All right. Well, we'll be back in 2 weeks with another interview. See you then.